July 25th, 1944. Over the quiet countryside of Bavaria, farmers paused their work as a strange, high-pitched scream tore across the sky. It wasn't the deep, throaty rumble of a piston engine they had grown used to since the war began. It was sharper, alien, almost metallic. A silver streak cut through the blue, leaving a thin white line behind. It was over before anyone could even point. Somewhere far above, Allied pilots on patrol exchanged startled glances. "What the hell was that?" one of them muttered over the radio. None of them knew yet, but they had just witnessed the first combat flight of the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. For 5 long years, the Allies had ruled the air. Their Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and Spitfires swept German skies clean of resistance. But now, suddenly, there was something new, something that didn't fit the rules of the game. "It looked like a meteor," one American pilot would later recall. "You blink and it's gone." The Me-262 was Germany's desperate gamble. A machine born too late and burdened by too many contradictions. On paper, it was unstoppable, capable of speeds over 540 miles per hour, almost 100 faster than the best Allied fighter. Its twin Jumo 004 turbojets gave it a shriek that sounded like the future itself. To the men of the Luftwaffe, battered and dwindling under endless Allied bombing, the Me-262 was more than a weapon. It was hope. They called it the Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapon that would turn the tide of war. But the miracle came tangled in politics, pride, and bad timing. General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top aces, had begged Hitler to let the Me-262 be used purely as a fighter. Hitler refused. In his obsession with striking back at Allied cities, he ordered the jet to be adapted into a bomber instead, carrying 2 small bombs under its nose. The Führer wanted a fighter-bomber, Galland would later write bitterly, and in doing so, he delayed the one aircraft that could have defended Germany. By the time the Me-262 finally entered true service, the Reich was crumbling. The Luftwaffe was running out of fuel, spare parts, and pilots. Germany's cities lay in ruins. Its once proud airfields were little more than smoking craters. Yet, amid the chaos, a handful of engineers and test pilots pushed forward, working by lantern light and under the wail of air raid sirens to finish their creation. The first squadron to receive the Me-262 was Erprobungskommando 262, a testing unit based at Lechfeld Air Base. The pilots who climbed into those sleek, swept-wing machines described the sensation as almost unreal. "It felt like being thrown into another dimension," one recalled. The cockpit shook violently as the twin jet engine spooled up, coughing and spitting flames before settling into a smooth, otherworldly whine. Once airborne, the jet sliced through the clouds like a knife. Allied aircraft that tried to follow were left spinning helplessly behind. Walter Nauetny, one of Germany's most celebrated fighter aces, became the face of the Me-262 program. He described the experience of flying it in near religious terms. "It was like having the wind itself as your ally," he said. In combat, he could climb faster, dive steeper, and vanish before the enemy even knew he was there. For a few brief months, the Luftwaffe's faith in the jet bordered on fanaticism. Allied intelligence, however, was quick to notice. Reports began to circulate among bomber crews of fast silver planes darting through formations, firing once and disappearing. Some thought they were experimental rockets. Others believed they were prototypes the Allies would never face again. But by August 1944, the sightings became too frequent to ignore. "We got something new up there," one squadron report read grimly. In truth, the Me-262's power came with crippling limitations. The Jumo engines were fragile, prone to flameouts and overheating. They lasted only about 25 hours before needing replacement, a luxury Germany could no longer afford. The jet's greatest strength, its speed, was also its curse. It couldn't turn tightly, couldn't climb quickly from a standstill, and was utterly vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Allied pilots soon realized that if they couldn't catch a Me-262 in the air, they could wait for it on the ground. The Luftwaffe tried to compensate by using long, straight autobahns as makeshift runways. Ground crews camouflaged aircraft under netting and trees. Still, the Allies found them. Reconnaissance photos from September 1944 showed jets lined up like wounded birds, engines covered, waiting for fuel that would never come. The numbers were grim. Out of roughly 1,400 Me-262s built, only about 300 ever became operational, and fewer than 200 saw actual combat. Most were destroyed before they could even leave the ground. One U.S. Air Force intelligence report put it bluntly: the enemy possesses the fastest aircraft in the world, but lacks the means to use it. That didn't stop the pilots from trying. Heinz Barr, a veteran Luftwaffe ace, recalled flying the Me-262 with a mixture of awe and dread. "We were faster, yes," he said, "but speed without numbers is a lonely kind of power." For every Me-262 that soared into the sky, there were 10 Mustangs or Thunderbolts waiting above its airfield. The imbalance was merciless. Still, for those first few weeks, the Me-262's debut shocked the Allied Air Command. Reports came in of bomber groups torn apart with frightening precision. On August 28, 1944, a formation of B-17s over Munich was attacked by jets moving too fast for gunners to track. Within minutes, 3 flying fortresses were down. The survivors described a silver blur that streaked past before anyone could aim. Allied engineers studied shell casings and impact reports, realizing that the jets carried 30 million Malawian kwaches, 108 cannons. Weapons so powerful a single hit could shatter a bomber's fuselage. To the bomber crews, it felt like the sky itself had turned against them. Yet the fear was short-lived. Allied strategists, pragmatic as ever, understood that every miracle weapon had an Achilles heel. They ordered reconnaissance flights to locate Me-262 bases, and once found, the instructions were simple: hit them on the ground. By October, the Luftwaffe's jet dream was unraveling. At Lechfeld, mechanics scavenged parts from wrecked aircraft just to keep a handful flying. Jet engines exploded without warning. Sometimes, pilots died not from enemy fire, but from their own technology. One flight log from the period notes grimly: engine failure at takeoff, pilot loss. The Me-262's sleek design belied its fragility. Allied pilots who encountered it up close spoke with a mixture of admiration and irritation. "You couldn't touch it once it got going," one Mustang ace said. "But if you caught it low and slow, it was as helpless as a duck on ice." Another joked, "They built a racehorse for a battlefield full of wolves." The irony, of course, was bitter. The Germans had finally created a machine that could outrun anything in the sky, except their own war. The Reich no longer had the fuel to power its miracle, the factories to maintain it, or the pilots to master it. By late 1944, the Me-262 symbolized not power, but desperation, a marvel of engineering flying to the ruins of a lost cause. Adolf Galland himself saw it clearly. "Too late," he wrote after the war. "It was always too late." Yet, amid all the technical setbacks and bureaucratic madness, there was still something undeniably haunting about those jets. Imagine the sight: dusk over a shattered Germany, the last light glinting off the silver wings of Me-262 as it howls into clouds. For a brief, flickering moment, it must have felt to its pilot that the future was his to command. But the Allies were learning. Every engagement, every down bomber, every radar sighting taught them more. Somewhere in the intelligence rooms of the U.S. 8th Air Force, a quiet realization took root. The Me-262 was invincible. It just needed to be caught at the right moment. And so, as 1944 turned to 1945, a new plan began to take shape. One that would turn the skies of Germany into a trap. The narrator's voice drops to a near whisper. The Me-262 was fast, but the Mustangs were patient. And in war, patience can be deadlier than speed. Then the camera lingers on the image of a jet abandoned on a snowy airstrip, its engines cold, its nose pointed skyward as it's still trying to fly. The sound fades. First wind, then silence. But the Americans weren't done yet. The voice continues. Somewhere in the gray skies over the Rhineland, a group of Mustang aces had begun to study the jet's habits, its weaknesses, its moments of vulnerability. And when the hunters became the hunted, History will record one of the strangest reversals in aerial warfare. The screen fades to black, the faint echo of a jet scream still hanging in the air. The story of Germany's miracle plane had only begun, and so had the reckoning that would bring it down. March 24th, 1945. Before dawn, the Rhine lay quiet under a slate-gray sky. The war in Europe was in its death throes. Allied troops had crossed into Germany. Cities were crumbling under constant bombardment. Yet, far above, the Luftwaffe still clung to one last dream, the Me-262 jet fighter. To the German High Command, it was a weapon capable of rewriting the war's final chapter. To the Allies, it was a last desperate threat to end the bombing campaign that was strangling Germany. At first light, radar stations along the Western Front reported unusual contacts, fast-moving aircraft approaching German airspace. The sound of Me-262 scream echoed over the radio like an omen. But this time, the Americans were ready. For months, U.S. air commanders have been studying these jets, analyzing their speed, their flight patterns, their habits. They had identified the key to defeating them, not in the air, but on the ground. The plan was simple but ruthless. Target Me-262 airfields during takeoff and landing. That was when these mighty jets, masters of the high-speed battlefield, became vulnerable. The U.S. 8th Air Force called it the Mustang trap. For the men flying P-51 Mustangs, it became the mission of a lifetime. These propeller-driven fighters, slower than the jet by over 100 miles per hour, would rely on timing, stealth, and sheer courage to catch their prey. Colonel John C. Meyer, a decorated Mustang ace, described it plainly. We didn't try to match them in speed. We tried to match them in patience. The U.S. Air Forces began coordinating dawn raids on Luftwaffe airfields across Bavaria, Saxony, and Lower Saxony. Intelligence pinpointed key bases, like Feld Akmer Hopsten, where the jets clustered. The orders were explicit. Destroy them before they could climb. The strategy played out in moments of terrifying precision. In the pale light of March morning, a squadron of Mustangs swept low over an airfield. Tracers stitched lines through the mist as anti-aircraft fire lit the air. On the ground, mechanics scrambled, trying to start engines, unaware of the shadows swooping above them. From the air, the scene looked almost cinematic. Jets poised for flight, suddenly showered with tracer fire and exploding in columns of smoke and flame. One of the most famous engagements occurred on October 7th, 1944. Lieutenant Urban Ben Drew, flying Mustang P, 51D Krasahorse, had been briefed to patrol near Akmer. He spotted a silver blur climbing from the runway, a Me-262. Drew dived into pursuit, weaving through clouds, his engine screaming. His target tried to pull away, but Drew closed the gap with careful timing. 2 bursts of his .50 caliber machine gun struck home. The jet burst into flame before Drew's eyes. Later, Drew was credited with 2 Me-262 kills that day. He recalled afterward, "They were fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen, but they had to take off sometime. That's when we caught them. It was all about the right moment." The truth was that the Me-262's most dangerous moments came when it was not yet in its element. While airborne, it could outrun any piston fighter. But to get there, it had to survive the vulnerability of takeoff. And the Allies, now fully aware of this, turned that vulnerability into a death trap. Statistics tell a stark story. Between late 1944 and the war's end in May 1945, the Luftwaffe lost over 100 Me-262s in combat, most of them destroyed during takeoff or landing. Entire squadrons were wiped out on the ground before they could climb to their full speed. Reconnaissance reports documented dozens of strafed runways, scattered fuselages, and smoking wrecks, a testament to the relentless American campaign. From the German perspective, it was devastating. Pilots who had once seen themselves as the future of aerial warfare now faced the bitter reality of attrition. Heinz Barr, reflecting on those months, wrote, "We had the fastest aircraft in the world, but speed alone could not save us. The Americans had learned patience, and patience killed us." The irony was not lost on those who fought. The Me-262, a marvel of aeronautical engineering, capable of speeds and maneuvers that seemed to belong to another era, was being undone not by another jet, but by propeller-driven fighters flying a very old-fashioned strategy: ambush and timing. In a rare post-war interview, Colonel John C. Meyer explained it with quiet pragmatism. "We didn't try to outfly them. We waited for them to make the first move. The rest was opportunity." One Mustang pilot described the scene during such an attack: "We'd be circling low, clouds breaking, waiting for the jets to come up. You could feel it in your gut the second one of them hit the runway. It was over. They couldn't escape us there." By spring 1945, the trap had proven devastatingly effective. Luftwaffe Me-262 units were no longer a significant threat. Fuel shortages, pilot losses, and constant airfield attacks had reduced the jet program to a shadow of its promise. Pilots who survived described airfields littered with wreckage, engines stripped for parts, and the once proud jets abandoned to rot. There was a grim poetry to it. The Me-262, which had entered the war as a promise of new age, ended it as a symbol of desperation. For every moment of glory in the air, there were dozens of moments where it failed to lift at all. From the German side, it was an admission of defeat. Galland, once the Me-262's most ardent supporter, wrote in his memoirs, "The jet was a masterpiece, but in war, masterpieces arrived too late." For the Americans, the victory was a testament to discipline, intelligence, and endurance. They had faced the fastest aircraft of the war, and they had learned not to match it on its own terms, but to beat it on theirs. The Mustang was slower, yes, but it was dependable, plentiful, and flown by men who knew that patience was as lethal as speed. There was also an irony in the victory. The Me-262 had been designed as a weapon to reverse the course of war. Yet it became a lesson in why technological marvels cannot change fate alone. For the Allies, it was a confirmation that strategy, timing, and adaptability could overcome even the most extraordinary innovations. On March 24, 1945, as the last jet streaked over the Rhine, the Americans had not only neutralized the Me-262 threat, they had rewritten the terms of aerial combat. The hunter had become the hunted, and the age of the piston engine, for now, had proven victorious. The closing image is vivid: an abandoned runway somewhere in southern Germany, silver Me-262s resting like fallen monuments, grass creeping through their landing gear. Their engines are cold, their promise unrealized. Around them, the war dies quietly as the roar of the Mustangs fades into memory. A veteran American pilot reflected years later: "The Me-262 could outrun us, but it couldn't outrun the war." And so the narrator closes. In the end, the Me-262 did fly, but mostly into history books. It was a herald of the jet age, but its legacy was not victory. It was proof that in war, patience can be deadlier than speed. The Mustang had proved it, and the sky had never sounded the same again. The screen fades to black. Somewhere, fading in the distance, the echo of a jet engine cries out, a reminder that technology marches on, but that in the calculus of war, humanity always has the final word.